and welcome to Check 1 2, where we give you the lowdown on testicular cancer by talking to survivors, advocates, and supporters. All recorded here at the world famous podcast studio, Glasgow. Today's guest is Aaron Wood, who was diagnosed with testicular cancer at the age of just 17 years old. Facing a life-changing diagnosis at such a young age, Aaron navigated treatment, relapse, and a long road to recovery with what we can only describe as resilience and determination. Now, over 20 years later, Aaron reflects on how the experience shaped his life, from losing friendships to finding strength in the unexpected places. In this episode, Aaron opens up about the emotional toll of cancer, the impact on his mental health, and how he found purpose in giving back to others facing the same battle. Aaron's story is a powerful reminder that while cancer changes you, it doesn't define you. So stick around, this episode is something that you don't want to miss.
So when I was young, I was 17 when I was diagnosed. So last year was my 20th anniversary since first being diagnosed, and basically there was nothing near to nothing about it. Obviously, the internet was not really there as much as it is today. There wasn't that much research, and I hadn't had any kind of illness prior. No headaches, no flus or anything like that. It's really come out of the blue, and it's really important to highlight that, really, that you don't really have to be down on your haunches to basically get something as serious as testicular cancer.
Yeah, no, you're right, and I think that's the main thing. I was the same. I didn't necessarily feel ill. You know, there was no illness along with it. I actually felt more ill going through the chemo than I did actually like having a cancer in my body, which was odd. You know, an odd experience.
And sometimes I've gone through life since, and I felt even worse than I did back then. And I think to myself, what was going on at that time? I was such a sporty young man, just a fit, used to be in teams at school. I was proud to be in the cricket team the year before I got cancer, and always sort of prided myself on fitness, and it just nothing made sense. And it still doesn't make sense, but we're here, and we're 21 years later and living a good life, so I can't complain.
Yeah, and I think that's important to get that message out there as well. You know, like there you are, 21 years later, and you're still living a healthy life. You know, it's the impact can be catastrophic for people, but I think to know that life goes on, and you know you can just like be yourself within all that. So
Yeah.
let's just kind of like take that back then. So you're saying you were 17 when you were first diagnosed.
Yes. Yeah, 17. Just started work, not long into my first career. Not long come back from a trip from Australia. When I finished school, my mum and dad treated me to a trip to Australia. Came back, and bolt out of the blue, really.
That's quite incredible as well. So again, you're probably in one of the kind of the guests who have been the youngest kind of age range
Okay.
of getting it. You know, I think like 18, 19. I don't think we've had anybody kind of like hitting that 16, 17 years. So 21 years ago, the way that kind of hospitalisation and all that worked and the treatment for testicular cancer was a lot different. So what was your kind of treatment journey? You know, you found that initial,
Yeah.
you know, did you find a lump or was it? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I went in the shower, and obviously, I mean, I wasn't aware of what this thing was, but I went to the shower, noticed I didn't look right. Purposely wore shorts around the house to see if anyone would notice, which might sound a bit weird to people, but that's the sort of thing that I did. And lo and behold, my mum sort of said, "Are you all right? Something doesn't look right." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, fine." I said, "Oh, if it continues, I'll go back in a week." Typical kind of man up syndrome. And the week later, it didn't go, and then my mum, as a 17-year-old, sort of forced me to go to the doctors. My doctors was very keen to stress that he didn't really think it was cancer. He actually called it a hydrocele, which I believe is a water retention
Mm-hmm.
in the testicle. but he still, as a matter of protection, sent me off to a ultrasound clinic. I was ultrasounded, and within about 30 minutes of that ultrasound, I was told to go back to the doctor, and the doctor told me I had cancer, and my life changed.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I suppose it's good then that even the initial doctor who thought this probably isn't cancer, which is something that we hear more and more, especially on the podcast, which is, it's still, 20 years later, you're still having doctors unfortunately misdiagnosing like hydrocele and
Yes.
things like that. But to be able to get told, relatively quickly still, how did you, looking back on that, how did you compartmentalize or how did you rationalize that being 17 and having testicular cancer and, you know, the prospect of losing a testicle at such a young age?
It was hard. I felt like I lost. I had to grow up quickly. I think that's the big message that I got. That I felt like there was a detachment a little bit from my friends. They were. It was an era, obviously, puberty, boys to men, and it was very, very, very difficult for me to kind of accept. But also, once I got in the cycle, it very clearly became apparent that my professor, he was called a professor, very leading on the subject of testicular cancer, very well respected both here and America, basically put me at ease.
Right.
And that became the big focus. I couldn't allow myself mentally at that stage to get weaker.
Mm,
That came later on, and I'm sure we're discussing that.
mm.
But that's the big thing. Sorry if I haven't answered that.
No, you definitely have. But I
No.
think that, and it shows that again, even at 17, and you still had that same kind of mental journey at the start of like I can't allow myself to kind of to get weak because you need to get through this.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite incredible for a 17-year-old for a start anyway, and to be thrust into quite a significant life event, and being,
Yeah.
having to deal with mortality, how friendships and relationships can change because of that. Um,
Yeah.
what were your peers like with you when, like in your friend group?
I did lose. I did lose people close to me. People, certain people broke off, and I've never spoken to them
Right.
since. And then some people came to the fore, and I met new people as a result of it. There's been good and bad. I'd like to think that it's more good because those people obviously didn't, but back then it was like I said, 20, 21 years ago. I don't think it was as well known as it is now. And I think if people really, the only sort of real information I had back then was on Lance Armstrong and the yellow bands that people used to wear, and that was but almost people. I mentioned this before to people that people that were wearing those yellow bands didn't actually even know what they meant.
Hmm.
They sort of wore those bands because they were trendy and they were fashionable, but they didn't realize that they went with the story of Lance, who had testicular cancer,
Yeah. I, th-
and it was strange.
I think you're right, and I've spoke about this. Like I sometimes speak about this when I go out and do talks as well. When that was the kind of high watermark for testicular cancer awareness. And everybody had one of these
Mm,
bands on. And I think you're right though. Because you were able to kind of like it became so sought after to get one, especially the initial
yeah,
run.
yeah,
That I think you're right. A lot of people just had the Live Strong band and didn't equate it with like testicular cancer. It was just about Lance Armstrong more
no,
than anything. Um, Not to take away from the awareness that he positively has made over the course of his career, but yeah, I talk about that quite frequently because after his own controversies, unfortunately, that's when
yes,
you saw the tide change on how people thought, and those people who had the wristband got rid of them or felt
yeah.
however they felt about Lance, but didn't really keep up with keeping testicular cancer as their
He was
awareness.
someone that, as a young, as a young man, I looked up to. I think he was someone that I admired, and unfortunately, obviously, that was something you sort of had that belief that if he could do it, I could do it, kind of mentality. I've mentioned that I came from a very sporty background. I used to be in the cricket team, and he was someone that I genuinely looked up to for all the right reasons. And then when this story broke, it was heartbreaking for me. It took me back to a place of vulnerability. It took me back to that place, time when I was diagnosed and wanted to look out for a new role model or a new hero. I've always been inspired by other people that do better than me. So that was a hard time.
Yeah,
But yeah, the yellow Livestrong bands came around, and it was something it was something that, like I said, like you said, it was like a fad, a trend. Everyone needed to get on it, and I haven't really seen anything take off in such a way since. But definitely at that time, that was the thing that I remember, like really vividly, that people would have those bands, but didn't always know what they meant.
yeah, yeah. And I'm much like you. Like um, my initial exposure to testicular cancer was through Lance Armstrong. I didn't, but it made, unfortunately, it made no impact in terms of how schools and things would educate about testicular
No,
cancer. And obviously, being like 17, going on 18, you would have been coming out of your education at that point in terms of high school. Did you?
yeah,
Were you aware of testicular cancer and the signs and symptoms of that before you got it? No,
no, nothing.
nothing.
And that was the scary thing. I honestly felt you had to be. I could call it naive. I honestly felt that you had to be cancer. I didn't even hear of childhood cancer like you hear. Like I didn't even hear of Great Ormond Street. Nowadays, this is all common, but back then, I didn't know. I thought you had to be really, really ill to then have cancer. Almost like it was like you're in the elderly, and that would be the last thing. Yeah, it's just a complete shock when I heard the doctor say I had cancer.
Yeah, and being again, coming back to kind of the age that you were, being so young, what was
Hmm.
the like? Can you remember what those feelings and emotions were when they turned around and said like, "Aaron, this is cancer, and this is it." Can you remember how you felt and what that meant to you at that time?
I just remember feeling unbelievably shocked, unbelievably upset, not only for me, but for also people around me, because at that time in my life, I had both set of my own grandparents. I had my aunt, my mum's twin sister around me. My mum's twin sister actually came with me to the doctor's surgery when I was told. My mum was, I don't know if she was so confident or confident that it wouldn't be anything, that my mum didn't actually come to that doctor's appointment, because I think she felt reassured that I'll be okay. I mean, I think, like I said, it was a knock on effect that everyone didn't really know a lot back then. And my emotions were all over the place. Just so many different emotions went through my head. But when it only started to come clearer when my doctor started to say, you've got a 97% chance to 99% chance that I'll clear this for you. Because in that early stage, it was like, I almost treat everyone and everyone gets cleared. And then I was like, okay, so I've got to have a little summer break away. Yeah. And that was when it started to become a little bit easier for
Mm.
me.
And then, so you've went through that. You've had your orchidectomy, and then what
Yeah.
was your chemo or radiotherapy treatment like? What did you get, and how long was that for
I
you?
believe I believe it was called BEP treatment. I don't know if they still treat it this way. And I would go in for 3 days, and then I would go in for a day the following week, and then a day the following week, and then back to 3 days, and then one day, and then one day, and then back to 3 days, and then one day, and then one day. And then I was, well, it sounds easy, but then had scans, CT scans, blood tests in between, and eventually was given the all clear. Yeah, obviously the physical side of it was hard to deal with, like losing my hair. Yeah,
Yeah,
that kind of thing was very hard at that age. Being looked at very young and people looking at you, that was very, very difficult to deal with.
And I think obviously, like you're growing up, you're just like you're maturing, you're going through puberty, and then to lose your hair due to the treatment. And I think at that point, looking in the mirror, you feel like the thoughts that you have about cancer before then, when you lose your hair, is when you, well, it's certainly for me, was when I went, oh no, this is this is real, and this is something.
That's when I started to, yeah, that's when I started to think, oh my God, this is serious, this is, wow. Because I didn't actually know anything. It all come as a shock. Everything come as a shock. I knew that potentially I just didn't, nothing related to my age and cancer. So I thought, oh, because I'm 17, it's not going to affect me the same way it's going to affect someone that's in their 90s. It was a weird time, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's the big thing as well. It's trying to normalize something that's so extreme and that in front of you. It really takes a toll on you mentally as well. And obviously, you're going through the middle of that treatment. Your relationships are changing. You've said that
Mhm.
you've kind of lost friendships and things like that. That must have been really quite tough for you at that young age. And then when you kind of came out the back of your treatment and you became and you got the all clear type of thing, when did you notice then that there was maybe a more significant impact on your mental health at that point?
Almost straight away when I think when I relapsed, because when I relapsed, I mentally prepared myself to die.
Right.
And I've had to come back from the absolute brink to get to where I am today. It challenged me physically, it challenged me mentally. So I think from that moment that the doctor said to me, it's come back again, then what are the odds now? 40% chance, stem cell transplant, potential of a double transplant, I'm getting very, very close to Christmas of 2005. So this is 20 years now. This year would be my 20th anniversary since the relapse. That's when it hit me, when I got told for the second time at 18, 18, that I was that was the hardest time in my life, actually.
Yeah. And with that relapse, um, was that a relapse in terms of like your other testicle, or was that just the cancer had came back in your lymph nodes and things like that?
I had a germ cell
Right.
cancer. Yeah, and no other testicle was affected. And I was told at the time if I wanted to have like a prosthetic treatment done, and I decided against that. And yeah, that was pretty much
Mm. Quite a bold move at
yeah.
17 to um, not go for the prosthetic. I know I
Yes.
didn't, I didn't go for the prosthetic, but I was 30, in a long term relationship and things like that. So I didn't feel that I needed that. But to be 17 and go, no, I'm quite happy not taking one. Was that something that you spent a lot of thought on, or did you just instantly kind of know when they asked you that you didn't want to take that prosthetic?
Instantly kind of said
Right.
no. Yeah, instantly said no. The hardest thing to decide was whether I wanted to
Yeah.
bank, and in the end, I did bank. And earlier this year, I decided that I didn't want to use the stuff that I
Hmm.
banked, which was the hardest decision that I had to make. And telling them that I didn't, I know I'm jumping forward a little bit, but telling them that I didn't need what I banked was difficult.
Mm.
Um,
It's a strange letter to
it brought
get.
back. Mm.
I literally just got mine through to say that do you want us to now destroy this? And
Yes.
it's such an impactful thing because even though you're aware that it exists, and my wife and I had already made the choice that we weren't going to grow our family anymore, and that I had went and I've had a vasectomy, which was probably the easiest vasectomy they ever had to do because they only had to
Mhm.
cut one tube. But even at that, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this being destroyed. Did you feel the same?
Yeah, it's very, very odd and very, very strange. But certain circumstances that have happened in my life have made it an easier
Right.
decision. I can discuss them if you want, but my wife's nearly 18 years older than me. So it's sort of like I'm 38, 39 this year, and my wife's
Yeah.
56. So, and my wife's also a wheelchair user. So certain things made it a little bit easier. That bringing children into the world would be a very, very difficult
Mm.
ask, and it made me deal with it in an easier, better way. I suppose it may become apparent that this relationship was going to take off, and things became a little bit easier to deal with. I suppose that's the best way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and and that helps, with any of these decisions. Life circumstances just kind of lead you
Mm.
to those decisions
Mm.
anyway, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I was always dreading saying that, I don't know if we'd be having children to somebody, but naturally it became more of a case of it might never happen
Mm.
anyway. So it just felt that it was an issue that didn't need to be addressed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But even at that, like I, I think even when you know that that's the case, and you know that you're making that decision, and even a decision based on us having already had children, it was still
Mhm.
a difficult one, even when I went for my vasectomy, because it's almost like a bereavement, even though you've
Yeah.
not took that away, because you're taking away the thing that is a possibility of something more. And I think that's the big thing that we we kind of try and address more and more as the podcast goes on, because again, male fertility isn't spoken about as much as anything else, and
100%.
especially with having a testicular cancer treatment, and all the issues that and the complications that come with that anyway. And you've got guys out there who, have been in the position where they've oddly not been asked to bank, or they've had
Mhm.
the operation and then been told, and then obviously there's maybe been an issue there, and it's still quite a complicated and complex issue that I think still needs to be addressed for a lot of men.
Definitely, it sounds like it. Yeah,
Yeah.
but sure.
So obviously with you, we'll kind of go back the way a bit. You've had that relapse. You've What kind of treatment did you go through chemotherapy again with your relapse?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had high dose chemotherapy that made me
Yeah.
neutropenic. And then from there, they hit me with stem cell transplant using my own stem. I thought at one stage I might need a bone marrow transplant, but that quickly got dismissed, and it was only going to be with me and my own
Right.
stems. They put this back in a different hospital this time, which made it harder because the first hospital I went to was a specialist cancer hospital. And then the following hospital was a more kind of like general hospital where anything could happen, which made it harder because when I was in that cancer hospital that was specialist, although I felt more like bonding. It felt like almost like an army experience. Like everyone was on the same page, fighting together. We're all getting through it together, geeing each other up, moraling each other up. And yeah, so I had that stem cell transplant, and then I was probably in there for about 2 weeks, being heavily monitored. As obviously my vulnerability was very low. And I was told maybe about 3 days before Christmas that there is a chance that I could come out for Christmas, but my potassium levels were low. So you need to overdose on bananas,
Yeah.
basically. That was what I was told by the doctor at the time. And on Christmas Eve 2005, I was released, and put, I wasn't put in remission technically, but technically they were happy enough with what was going on that I used it kind of as my date of remission, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. It's something I've even touched on, is like, even with having, you know, just going through, thankfully, touch wood, one kind of bout of testicular cancer, and mine never, thankfully, came back or anything. But it changes you completely, and the fact that you've had, your initial diagnosis, then you've went into remission, you've had to get all the kind of the stem cell stuff, and go through all of that. There's no wonder that there's a change and one, your perspective on life, and
Mm.
dealing with your own mortality at that age is difficult. And I think you said at the start, you do worry about everybody else around you, and
Yeah, that's the big thing. That was the big focus. I mean, worrying about what my parents would think, worrying, you hear about those stories about parents never want to bury their children young and all this, or, you shouldn't go before, there's time. And I was just like, I'm worried about them. And I almost sometimes put on a brave face during my battle.
mhm,
I felt like I had to be strong. And it was only towards the end that I felt like I can't, and I physically, mentally sort of switched
yeah,
off. I had that mental breakdown. Tough. Going back into society again. I was worried that I had mental scars that people could see that I had cancer from how I looked or how I smelt, or there were so many different things that I had to deal with at that
yeah.
time. But
That's interesting though from that point of view, because I've n- I've never heard kind of somebody say that, but on this, but I have heard that. I worked in psychiatry as a nursing assistant for a lot of years, and you hear patients talk about, like if people can see that I'm unwell, and
mm,
I've never heard it from like somebody who's been through testicular cancer to think, yeah, can they see it on you? That must have been really hard. And
yeah.
did you did you manage to seek any help for that kind of, or counselling, things like that?
Yeah, we were lucky in our specialist cancer unit. We had sort of like a focus group where we had access to counsellors, and you could go around. Largely these people. It's important to tell you that I went to a specialist cancer unit, but not a children's unit. I was offered the chance to go to a children's hospital, but because I was 17, I didn't want a bed block for a younger child.
Right.
I made that conscious decision. So I was in there with adults, probably about my granddad's age, that probably wouldn't have made it through, sadly. And yeah, there was like focus groups where you would talk to people. There were reflexology sessions, massage spa sessions. And I got a lot out of this sort of kind of like complementary therapy treatment that they were running. And I got to speak to counsellors. Sometimes it felt like I wasn't getting a lot out of the sessions, and then all of a sudden something would click, and I would be like, "Wow, okay, I'm, I'm on the right
Yeah.
path." It gave me that kind of. Sometimes you'd feel good for 5 minutes, and then you'd go away from the session, and it's like you never had the session. But largely, they were positive.
Yeah.
You know.
And did you learn anything that kind of stood you instead, going forward, after your diagnosis? Was there anything that you were able to hold on to from those counselling sessions that, in everyday life, that you were able to kind of use, like when you felt that maybe people were looking at you, or if you had those intrusive thoughts of, oh, maybe somebody can see, or do I smell funny because I've had cancer? Like, what was the kind of the tools that you were given to use to kind of help, stop that?
There wasn't really given any advice. It was more kind of listening. But I kind of used things in my day to day life, like meditation, to help conquer thoughts. Obviously, it's got easier as time has gone on, but meditation was very much in place in my life at that point. And the power of prayer. I'm quite. I wouldn't say deeply religious, but I have a hold faith. And yeah, they were the two things that I remember.
Yeah. And did you have that faith as a young man as well, like when you were going through your cancer treatment?
More
Since,
since,
yeah,
which is weird. Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah. More.
so then, obviously since, and you've had that, was that something? Did you look to the church for, that kind of comfort, and obviously, trying to help navigate obviously such a big mortality fear, yeah,
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 yeah. I went to the church, and there's an experience that I went to a church, and I felt something strange. But throughout my illness, I didn't have anything. My mum often asked me, "Did anyone come to you? Did you feel like a guardian angel was there by your side? Did anyone look out for you?" And I say, no, that honestly, no, nothing had happened.
Yeah, it was.
like that.
Aye, it was
But
just more of a,
since don't.
yeah.
Mm.
And you find that, that the people can have their opinions on religion and things like that, and I always tend to look at the err on the side of, if it brings comfort and it brings you to your, something that makes you feel good, then it's definitely something that you should go do and experience that. And I think if it helps in any kind of way, it's certainly something that, why wouldn't?
I mean, I don't preach it. It's not something that I would tell people go out. I feel like I'm on a kind of a spiritual
Yeah.
journey, more than sort of a religious journey. But I definitely sort of hold something and believe I'm here for a reason. I wasn't, I'm 20 years later, 21 years later, and I'm very proud of where I've come, both as a boy, as a man, and where I am
Hmm.
today. And I'm all about giving back. I try to give back to this illness as much as I possibly can. I've done so, I've done some stuff with Great Ormond Street directly. I used to work for a very famous toy store where I was a personal shopper, where I got to meet other people that had gone through these cancer
Hmm.
experiences and were able to give them back, sort of like almost like a make a wish. Well, it was a make a wish. I've been able to action things like that, so I've really been able to give back as much as I can, which is obviously rewarding. At the same time, it is very reflective. So yeah.
Yeah. And how did how do you think that you then changed in terms of, yeah, obviously you've been 17, you're saying that, you kind of, it's almost like two different lives as such. Been the kind of biggest changes since your testicular cancer diagnosis and after, that you found, as a young boy, young man, to then going into adulthood, what is it that's changed for you?
I think the biggest thing that changed for me was more empathy. I understood. I sort of listened to people more. Before I was 17, it was like my way or no way, and then when I become the second life, so that I keep referring to, it became about the bigger picture. It's not just me. It's about working as a team. It's about listen. Other people have their struggles too, and at that time, you think it's just you. In that time, I was able to reflect on and now and then I'm allowed to reflect on other people's. Back then, I was only thinking about myself.
Mm.
So cancer hasn't always been negative for me. There's been a lot of aspects to the illness that have given me positive outlooks. I always said to my professor that I was never upset that I got cancer. I was in a weird way. I was kind of. It gave me a focus. It gave me something to work something to work with rather than against. Even though it's something so tragic, it gave me. Does that make
Oh,
sense? I don't know if other people have spoken like
yeah,
this.
no, it definitely has. It's certainly something that I felt, and if and the guys that I've spoken to since, I, I don't know if you had this, but when I went through my testicular cancer journey, I didn't know anybody who had it apart from the famous people, so you weren't able to talk to anybody. But since, and obviously having the ability to do the podcast and talk to other guys, mm, nearly all have had that. It's such a negative thing, in terms of the word cancer, but the
Mm.
positives that have happened for people since, I'm testament to that, and it's in of itself. Having left school and basically been working as a nursing assistant in NHS for nearly 20 years, going through my cancer journey, and then obviously getting in tow with Richie at Cahonas, who um, I'm now working for. So, and I've left my job and I work for the charity full time. So it's like, if I didn't have my cancer, I wouldn't be able to do this, or
Mm.
go around and make an impact in like places of business or schools by giving the awareness talks that we do. And I feel very positive about my life since my cancer. I haven't had that, and compared to some of the negative stuff. And there's obviously negative things that can happen in terms of the impact of the physiological side effects, the mental side effects that happen with that. Obviously, you're nearly you're 2 decades out of having it. Have you had any kind of long-term side effects physically from your chemo and your therapies, or have you kind of managed to stay relatively healthy since?
No, I'm pretty in a good. I mean, I very much yo-yo sometimes with my weight, but and mental health can wane. But I wouldn't necessarily associate that directly with the cancer.
Hmm.
It's just general sort of like wear and tear of life, I think. But largely, I'm okay. I always try to put my best foot forward, get on with it, and do the best I can despite the challenges that I faced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's some things that I still get, whereas I sometimes get some peripheral neuropathy. So it's like I get kind of some numbness in my fingers, and I had tinnitus going into it. As a young man, I'd blast music through headphones, so I had a slight bit of tinnitus anyway. But throughout my treatment, it got worse. And it's never went away since, and it's pretty bad now, to the point where even though I can hear, I'm pretty deaf because all I can hear is the kind of ringing sound. And I think especially in the last couple of years, I think getting older doesn't come itself as well. So
And then I've done other things in my life. I compare my cancer battle to I applied for Deal or No Deal. You know the
mm,
Noel Edmonds, the original series, and it reminded me weirdly of my cancer journey. I kind of attached to how luck. It felt like how I felt lucky that some people can get through it and some people can't. And I associate that game show. I don't know. It came on at the same time or aired at the same time I was going through early stages, and I was saying there are people over here that are not going to, not going to get through this, and they're going to be on, and I'm going to be on the red side. The game show's always kind of played on my mind as a kind of reminder of my illness.
right, right,
I applied for the show. I got close to getting on the show, but didn't get on the show. And then because I didn't get on the show, and the show didn't give me closure, I found it for a long time hard to watch
yeah,
because all my life I'd got closure. Scans are fine, bloods are fine, and Deal or No Deal didn't give me the closure on why I didn't get through. And then the mental health came almost around that. Like, why did some of these stigmas that I've mentioned, like, why didn't I get on? I associated, is it because I had cancer? Is it because I look different? Is it, that was straight. That was a strange experience too.
yeah. And I think then when you look at that and how that would have affected you, and I get that to a certain extent as well. Did you end up seeking help for those thoughts, and did you end up kind of like is it just something that you've just had to deal with?
Yeah, it just manifests sometimes, and occasionally it kind of gets a bit out of hand. But I don't seek any help for it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, you just use like kind of meditation and kind of
yeah.
distraction more than anything to kind of try and stop that from happening.
At the time, it was very, very hard. It was very hard to deal with. But as it's got times gone on, I sort of look at it in a more positive way and think, okay, this door is not going to open for me, and I try to focus on doors that will open for
Yeah,
me. There's always sort of another hoop that I can jump through. I've got ADHD
right.
anyway. Quite open about that. So sometimes the way the straight line is not always the right line, and sometimes I have to go off to go round, and that kind of helps, if that makes sense, because you're not always consented to one way of thinking.
Yeah.
And as I've got older, I've learned to use it as more of a skill rather than something that I need to hide.
Hmm.
And a lot of my emotions when I was younger, before cancer, the life one, were hiding who I was. And now it's more about being open and honest and telling people,
Yeah.
giving back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think that there was maybe oh no, I'm just trying to think how to word this. Do you think there was maybe a help and having ADHD when you were going through your cancer treatment? You know, do you think there was something that ADHD maybe would have helped you when you were going through your cancer treatment compared to somebody who was neurotypical, who, you know, because you were so used to not having to go the straight line and kind of circumnavigate that way? Did
Mm.
you do you find,
Gave me a clear
yeah,
focus. I mean, it made me realize that I need to do this and I want to do this and I want to do this. So for the first time in my life, I had a focus where back then it was just like I was wild child, like,
mm-hmm, yeah,
yeah. I wouldn't say no, I wasn't drinking young or doing drugs or anything like that. I wasn't that kind of person, but I kind of had, I was carefree. I enjoyed life and I still enjoy life, but I was enjoying life a little bit differently back then. I was going to rock concerts and, not really worried about day, day to, yeah, it was a very, very different time,
yeah.
you know.
And I suppose,
Now I've learned what's priority. My priorities are,
yeah,
my priorities. Yeah.
and I suppose it's even like when you look at it, you know, like we are, you know, I'm a couple of years older than you, but we've got this very kind of close age range where you think, you know, 20 years ago for us, you know, it doesn't seem like much has changed, but it has all
Mm.
at the same time, and I think how well, you know, even just the treatment that you got to what I would have got, even though they were the same. Like I got BEP as well. I got the BEP as
Okay.
well. But even just those journeys would have been slightly different in terms of, you know, how they were kind of put together, and it it's just so interesting when you kind of look back at 20 years ago and you're going, "Ah," like for me it's not that long. And I remember having this conversation with somebody. When somebody says 20 years ago, I think 1995 rather than you know
I know.
rather than
Mm.
2005, you know. It's I'm like, oh god, I'm getting to that age where it's just a little bit too far away now.
I mean, I'm a massive QPR fan, and the other day I noticed that the playoff final where I went to against Derby was 11 years ago, and I'm like, oh wow,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
yeah. it's and it's
But it's the whole cancer battle generally. It's really a myth. So sometimes I can even forget that I've had cancer.
mhm.
It can go so far to the back of the mind. And then I can get emotional hearing the more stories that I hear now where people are being diagnosed young. And I kind of get emotional more than I would have done prior, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
no, that makes sense. And how is it
You're
then?
hearing a lot more people in youth football teams and stuff like
Mhm.
that. There's a lot more stories coming out slowly. I'm not saying that massively, but a lot more than when I was
Yeah.
young. Obviously, there's people like that are around that I've heard since, like Jason Cundy, Jimmy
Mhm.
White, but these people weren't really on my radar at the time. The focus, like I said when I first started, was like Lance Armstrong, Yellow Band, and then since it feels like there's been a lot more. And that, when I hear someone's going through it, oh my god, it's like I've been diagnosed for the third time. It's triggers so many different emotions, like almost like it's me. It really plays on your
Mhm.
mind.
Yeah. Uh, I've spoke about this in the podcast, and I remember the first few episodes. Um, it was an odd one because I had the same type of feelings. It was I'm hearing all these stories that are similar, and it almost brings you back to your own experience. And but thankfully, you know, like it's just became me just listening to the stories now rather than putting myself in that
Mm,
place.
hmm
And obviously, you've kind of you have looked at some of the podcasts and things like that, and
Yeah.
as somebody who has watched it and been through it, what are your thoughts on then, just as a resource for people who are going through it? Would you have wanted something like the podcast when you were going through your diagnosis, or
Oh, absolutely. Nowadays, I would have been one of those people that use social media for the world of good, that documents every story, that almost like a live diary. That would have been, at that time, I just felt like it was just, I was on my own. It was like dog eat dog, kind of like nobody had gone through what I had gone through. Nobody, I was the only person that had this. It was really weird. And nowadays, yeah, absolutely, I would have tapped into all the information I could have got. This is a force for good for
Yeah.
sure.
And that I'm grateful you saying that, because that's what we really want to try and do. And the whole idea of the podcast, obviously it's something that Richie wanted to do, but when, and again I've said this before, but when we were going through this, and my wife and I were looking for, those positive stories that can happen, like for everybody, even though you've had this negative thing happen, but even 10 years ago, there wasn't anything out there, and you couldn't look to
Mm,
see, a Todd or an Aaron or somebody speaking about their experience, to go, oh, that's how I'm feeling. I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that this has happened to. And that's our main goal, is just to kind of be able to kind of help guys, you know,
mm.
at
There
any
is some
stage.
stigma, isn't there? Really big stigmas where we do, as men, sometimes we have to put on our brave faces and go out there in the world and kind of act like nothing. And I think as well with mental health, we are starting to see sort of some clear space where people can openly talk and discuss, which is can only benefit
Yeah,
us.
and uh, and uh,
Yeah.
and they both go hand in hand, and I think that's something that hopefully gets better. I know certainly, when I went through my treatment, I didn't get access to as much of the kind of counselling stuff as you had, which
Mm,
I'm glad that you were able to kind of access. And maybe I did, and I just can't remember. But I obviously got the reflexology and things like that while I was in hospital.
mm,
But the hope is to end the stigma, not just about testicular cancer, and speaking about your balls, and being able to go to the doctors, and be comfortable doing that. But it's the after effects of having that treatment, and the mental health aspect is the big one, because like you said, men are very bad at talking about both of these things separately, but when they're both together, it's probably even worse
mm,
as well.
mm,
So if we can kind of eradicate that stigma and try and get guys the help that they deserve and need, because some guys are lucky and they lose a testicle and it's like water off their back. They're like, yep, fine, that's
mm.
happened, move forward. But, for a lot of people, it can be really traumatic, and have a massive impact on your life going forward. And, even if you are having all these positive experiences around it, there still can be a chink in your chain.
Mm. I actually have a quote where I made it up myself, where I'm a part-time survivor, full-time fighter. That's kind of my quote that I live by, that it never goes away. 20, 21 years ago, we talk about time that just goes so fast, but I'm always living that. It never goes away. Don't ever, expect that one day you'll wake up and it will just disappear from you, because you'll always get little memories or reminders or you know
Mm,
but that's what I live by. That quote, it's a quote I've made up. I don't know if anyone else has got that quote, but it's something I kind of hone on to. I'm always fighting. I'm always, some days are harder, some days you don't have no motivation to go outside, some days you do, sometimes you have too much, but yeah,
yeah, that's a
that's
great quote, and it's. I think you need to start making T-shirts and get that.
good
Yeah,
idea.
just get yourself onto Shopify, and get the T-shirt made, and you'll be fine. um, but well, all joking aside, though, that is it's actually a really lovely way to put it. Because it is that kind of part-time survivor, full-time fighter. I think that's right. I think like, yeah, because there's times where hopefully you don't think about having had cancer, and you hopefully are just living your life, and
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, and I'm sure I speak for most people that will listen to this that have been through it, maybe even yourself, that any kind of bump or bruise or joint pain, or you're instantly thinking, oh, maybe is it that? And that's the first thought that comes to your head. You don't actually rationale and think, it could be something separate. It always goes back to the illness. Oh, I've got a bad arm today. Is it that, I had shoulder cancer pain in the shoulder? Is it that again? Or is it just that I've overstretched? You don't think like that. You can't rationale. You can't, and that's hard.
yeah.
That's hard. That's the hardest thing to deal with. The mental games that the illness has left me
Hmm.
with. the overthinking for sure. Everything's overthinking, worrying about what people might think. Well, what they might see. Um,
No, I'm right
yeah,
there with you. I've had recently. I had a just a mouth ulcer, and I was like,
yeah,
"That's I've got mouth cancer." That was my initial thought, and
mm, mm.
like every so often, if you were to go through my search history, every so often you'd get some type of cancer because I felt like a bit of twinge here, or I've had that. I'm going,
Yeah.
"Oh, it's mouth cancer," or I've got stomach cancer. It's
So bad, isn't it? And then some of the symptoms you put in, even if they're trivial, you sort of match it up, and there's always something that says cancer, isn't there? And you're sort of like, oh God. And then that, yeah, it's. I try not to do that, but as we know with the doctor's surgeries, they're not very easy sometimes to get hold of, and then you're in your own thoughts, and it's so easy to do that you kind of play self-doctor, and something I need to stop doing, really, or try to stop
Oh
doing.
yeah, me too. But it's so easy when you have, a computer in your hand, and you're just like, oh, I'll check that, and you really shouldn't. You should stay away from Doctor
Mm.
Google completely. But
Yeah.
when you get that paranoid way, when you've had cancer, you do, there's every
Mhm.
so often you go, no, it's coming back. It can't not.
Yeah, especially at the early stage. So I relapsed both times in July.
Right.
So I call July month Curse of July. That and I actually have something to look forward to now in July because I actually got married in July 2018. So that's my wedding
Right.
anniversary. So I used that time as a force for good. So now I can focus on my wedding anniversary as well as focus on that hard
Yeah.
time. It's always kind of a reflective time, but also a time where I can look forward and on.
Hmm.
And that's how I try and live my life. I always try and think everything for a reason, try and stay in the here and now. And yeah,
And much like you were at the start, when you talked about, that initial diagnosis, you worry about everybody else. But in a positive way, come July, you're able to go, right, this is about me and my wife, and you're able to concentrate on that
yeah,
positive thing, which is a lovely thing to have rather than that negative experience. And even though you've got the positives from it, to be able to have that negative experience kind of almost cancelled out because you have to think about doing something and with somebody that's a thing of love and joy more than anything.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, which is
yeah.
lovely. That's it's such a great
Mhm.
thing. I think as well, like having these experiences and having all this happen to you, and when you've from being 17 to, did you say you're 38 now?
38,
38,
yeah, 39 in October. I started to tell people that I'm 40 next year, which is quite a weird thing to say, but I couldn't look forward before, so every day was like, oh, blood test here, check up here. Now I sort of like live. Oh, I want to make it go as far. Let's plan something for 2026. I like to look ahead. It's strange dynamic, but it shows that progress is being
yeah,
made. At that time when you're going through it, every day feels a little bit like everything's happening, and everything's happening, and then all of a sudden you're sort of like thrown back into the society. um, and now I'm able to kind of plan. I've already got a concert booked for October, and I'm able to plan more, where before it'd be like, no, I'm not doing anything past this
yeah,
week.
yeah.
um,
And I take it that's you, like there's no more blood tests, there's no more checkups. That's
no,
you. You've been away for like, probably about 10 years now. You've probably not had anything.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I suppose then, just as a kind of a final roundup, then
Hmm.
what advice would you want to give your younger self or somebody who is about to embark on a similar journey through their testicular cancer? What would you have liked to have heard, or what would you want to say to somebody that's going to be listening to this and that's about to go through it that would maybe help them?
Good question. I would say seek help. Don't be scared to do it. Don't go alone. Don't try to hide your emotions. Don't try to man up, as I explained earlier, and really kind of like talk. Don't be embarrassed. This is your life. You only get one life, and if if I had gone about what I was planning to do before what I said about my mother, I might not have been here doing this podcast today. So I definitely have learned to talk, collaborate. There are people here willing to listen to you. There are people here that can learn from your story, can learn from your journey. There are other people that are going to have the same situation as you. So please reach out. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, brilliant. And I suppose like the kind of the other question I've got then is kind of going back to that young man that, you know, had that experience of losing friendships and things like that and people disappearing.
Yeah.
You know, is there anything that you would say to those who might come across this because of the clips, that if somebody is going through testicular cancer at a young age, and what would you have liked to have somebody have said to your friends or the people that you lost during that time?
I would just like them to have been more open-minded, and I think as we've got older, as a society, as awareness is there, I think people are more open-minded to it. I don't see as much hate when I speak about it as I did then. I think there was a lot of people that didn't really know what it was about, didn't even know if you could catch it off someone because we were so young, a bit like the coronavirus. I would, yeah,
Yeah, just be a little bit more open minded and
yeah. The big thing is open-minded and
yeah.
supportive. It was hard losing friends. It was really hard losing people that I trusted at that
Mm,
age. But my wife likes Irish music. My wife's got an Irish background, and they said in your life you can only count on the fingers of your hands your true friends. And I've definitely learned that that quote is very true as well. Sometimes people will not be your friends throughout your life, and this was an experience which tested. You know, for whatever reason, these people are not in my life anymore. But I'm proud to still be here. And if they come across this podcast, I wish them luck in whatever they're doing in their
yeah.
lives.
It's like, there's an old Scottish phrase. I don't know if it kind of there's something similar in England, but it's what's for you will only go by you. So, and I think that's what you find in life is the older you get. And I think when you go through an experience like cancer, that's the positive thing that you feel. It's like, well, if it's for you, it won't go past you. You'll have it. Be that good, be that bad. It's your life's just your life, and it's making the most out of it all, I think.
It almost feels like one big soap opera at
Yeah,
times. Like I'm just a main character, and life's going on, as we said about aging process and stuff like that. But still, sometimes it feels so close. And the times where it feels so close is when you hear about somebody going through it still, or you hear a story. I mean, John Hartson was raising a lot of awareness a few years ago. I know he's probably still is, but when he was going through it, you were aware of the outpouring, and it brings a lot of emotion because I didn't have that support from key people at that time. And it was nice to see that.
yeah, yeah. No, I think it is, and as time goes on, and hopefully, as Cahonas, that's what we're managing to do as well, and raise that awareness and raise that profile, and
Mm.
obviously the
Good.
podcast and the other things that we're involved in, and that support network is something that we're really trying to get, and a community of men like us who have been through it, who are able to talk to not only each other but to other guys who are going to be going through a similar situation as well. But
Thank you for your
no,
time.
thank you so much for coming on Check One Two, Aaron. It was a pleasure talking to you, and
Pleasure talking to
yeah,
you.
keep in touch. I think
I will
yeah,
do.
it's certainly something that we always need as many voices in the community as we can. So no, I'm really grateful to you.
Thank you, and I wish everyone luck going through this illness, whether you're a family member, the actual person going through it, a friend. You know, my best wishes are with you.
Uh,